Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, November 7th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary. Day 2 of Trump 2. Here we are. And by here, I mean on this podcast, which is now available daily on YouTube for your video viewing pleasure. And by we, I mean executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
So the postmortems are starting. Kamala Harris finally came out 4 o'clock yesterday and made her concession speech, and she conceded that she had lost the election. She conceded to Donald Trump. She conceded that there would be a peaceful transfer of power. She did not concede that the fight will continue. And don't stop fighting. Keep fighting, because apparently if you want to keep the fire burning, you have to keep the fight going. Otherwise, the fire will go out. I don't know what the fight is, and I don't know what the fire is. And I think in that sense, Matt, you said in our text chain that it was one of the more absurd concession speeches that you had ever heard.
Yeah, it was.
We can't even provide the presumption of grace, as our friend Mark Halpern would say, here at her moment of lowest ebb.
Well, I don't think she did.
Fine, that's fine. Let's not extend the presumption of grace.
I'm simply reciprocating. You know, I mean, she gave a 12-minute speech. It was a campaign speech she gave. It was as though she had won the campaign, including the reactions from the crowd. Though so this may be a kind of a Kennedy-Nixon debate thing. I listened to the speech. I didn't watch it on TV. So I understand that, of course, as always, Harris looked great and came out smiling. I understand that Tim Walz was crying, which not a surprise, I will say. And then the crowd, though, what I was hearing, they were very enthusiastic. And at times, the one time she first made reference to President Trump, they almost started one of the lock him up chants. You know, it was like one of those.
She said, "I called President-elect Trump,"
right? And they started saying something,
and they were booing.
Booing and saying something.
Yeah.
Unclear. Yeah. Whatever. Okay, it's a concession speech. Granted. What she didn't do that Hillary Clinton did do 8 years ago was say, "I hope he succeeds." She never said that. Instead, the back half of the speech painted the authoritarian nightmare that she has been describing on the campaign trail, and that the media is, again, saying is going to fall when Donald Trump has a second term. And that I thought was odd. I mean, you lost the election. You lost it decisively. You didn't win anything. Why not just say, "I talked to President Trump today. I conceded the election. I'm going to help with the peaceful transfer of power. But I want my supporters to know we're going to continue to fight," even if you want to use that word, which apparently Democrats can use, but Republicans cannot. I'm going to continue to fight for the values that I believe in the years ahead. See y'all later. That wasn't what we got. And so I was a little bit, I was a little miffed, John.
But not only does she not hope that he succeeds, I think the fight is the fight to constrain him. That's the fight that continues. Because, as John has brought up before, how can she wish well the rule of the man rule, the presidency of the man that she said is a fascist?
The regime, Abe.
What's that?
The regime.
That's right. The regime. Yes.
Yes.
But
That is my.
This is why we should add that just before she gave this very late in the day concession speech, there's no reason she shouldn't have given it in the morning. She did call Trump, and from what we know of that call, she couldn't resist scolding him as well and saying, "I hope you're the president of all Americans," which is ironic because he actually did put together a broader coalition that does look more like America, as the Democrats like to say. And her own party, which loves what America looks like when it votes Democratic, had been calling these people garbage in the run up to the election. So it didn't. I agree with Matt. It didn't even sound like a concession speech, but there was the as a bookend to the Harris campaign, it had the same sort of vapid and meandering tone, and no one will remember either her campaign or this speech in 2 weeks.
That's an interesting just thing to take a few moments on. So I read somewhere, I think Edward Isaac Dovier of The Atlantic said, she is clearly setting herself up to be the leader of the resistance going forward.
Wow. Well, that's like Trump's luckiest break in a while.
I have a son named Isaac, so I am innately sympathetic to Edward Isaac Dovier, but he is a comic figure on social media, inadvertently comic figure very often. And so I'm inclined, of course, if I read something by him, to think that the opposite is likely true. But this seemed to me to be as dumb a thing as I've ever read, because she is about to go down a memory hole so deep and bottomless that in 2034, when there is a question on Jeopardy about who was the Democratic nominee in 2024, the three panelists will stand there blank until the tone goes bumpa and Ken Jennings or whoever's the host says, Kamala Harris. Who was Kamala Harris? Only he will probably pronounce it Kamala, because he too will have forgotten that we were beaten over the head with the idea that we were to pronounce her name Kamala. So
Kamala.
Excuse me, Kamala.
Kamala, John.
Go. Kamala.
God.
Kamala. So among the many memory holings that we are going to have is, of course, Kamala Harris. I think Tim Walz is actually now will have a job after January, right?
He has 2 more years in his term.
2 more years of his job, and I don't know.
That's not going to happen.
Okay,
that's not gonna happen. And then he can run for president.
But
yeah,
he would make a good game show host, because he has the sort of demeanor on stage.
You can see him coming out
not
to the lights and waving to everyone.
Yeah.
Hello.
Pointing. Not Jeopardy. Maybe is it Cake?
Yeah.
He could host,
or the floor.
He can host the floor.
Yes. Yeah,
the floor. Okay, but I'm saying that the Democratic Party has a mission, an obligation, a deep mission internally for its own sanity, and I don't mean this because I mean, they will believe this is the case, to make it as though what just happened never happened, was anomalous and weird, and everything about it was weird, and provides no guideposts for them going forward. Because, and you're already seeing this in the postmortems, it's so odd. He was so old. He didn't quit. Then he ran. He had a good economy, but people weren't buying it. And then, of course, they had to. It was so late, and she only had 107 days, and she couldn't really get purchase. And then he got shot, and that wasn't fair. And the American people are garbage, everything is terrible. Yeah. And so going forward, they don't really have to change, because it was the very unique circumstances of the 2024 election that explain the defeat, and they're irreproducible. Unless, they nominate Bernie Sanders and he's 87 and then he has a stroke on stage in 2028 and AOC has to go from being the vice presidential nominee to the presidential nominee.
Yeah. Well, so can we distinguish through some of the different forms of the blame game?
That's what we should do the entire podcast. Yes.
Okay. So here's what it strikes me as some of the categories. You mentioned Bernie Sanders. I'll start with him. He released a statement. He blamed the Democratic Party for abandoning the working class. Of course, in Sanders' mind, the way to appeal to the working class is through socialism, which actually has never been the case anywhere that the working class is.
But socialism has never been tried. So
that's true. Okay, yes, I need to reflect for a moment. In any case, Bernie, the old Red Guard, he's still saying the Democratic Party is to blame because It abandoned the working class. So that's one category. Then there's the blame the voters. That's a classic. And that goes from either Americans are garbage, which we've heard, to a slightly more specific argument that you'll hear on MSNBC that the voters are racists and or misogynists, and that's why they voted. And you know, we have to say, MSNBC has been equal opportunity in blaming racism and misogyny, because they're specifically also saying that Hispanic men are misogynist and racist, and black men are misogynists in their postmortem, which is a great way, I think, to appeal to those voters in the years ahead.
Well, MSNBC knows that there is not a single black male in America except Eugene Robinson, who is on, and Al Sharpton, who were on their panels, who was watching MSNBC. So they're not harming their audience. They may be harming the one of the two American parties, but for them, this is great, because the gentry class, that's
where they're going.
That's their bread and butter.
And then finally, and for me the most interesting, is the Biden folks versus the Obama folks. And that relationship, that rivalry between Biden and his team and Obama and his team, is now entering a new phase in the relationship, with the Biden core group of insiders saying that, one, the only person to ever beat Donald Trump is Joe Biden, right?
That's one.
Two, you forced Biden out. And three, you gave us this nominee who was designed in a Berkeley chemistry lab to be the
Berkeley McGill
chemistry lab, to be the epitome of West Coast out of touch limousine liberalism. Yeah. And you expected us to win. And the Obama folks are coming back. This is why I just love this. Obama folks are coming back and saying, well, your guy gave us the inflation and the border and embarrassed everybody in the debate in June. And so what the Obama people will say, like Axelrod and Pluff, is that Biden dug a hole so deep, Harris couldn't climb out of it. And that debate is so interesting. Yes.
You are quoting David Pluff.
Yes.
Who, of course, came onto the campaign to help Harris and just said, right, their team was so great. Jen O'Malley, Dillon, they were so great.
Yeah.
But the hole was just so deep.
We couldn't do it.
Couldn't quite climb out of it. So it had this fantastic quality, this tweet, of being it was Brutus is an honorable man.
Yes. Literally a graven image is written here, right? It's like the whole.
You know who's right about everything in this? The closest person to being right is actually Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And that's because the class discussion, which the Democrats love to bury because they like to blame billionaires, even though they are the party of billionaires and of multimillionaires. People who earn over $100,000 a year went decisively for Kamala Harris. And they forgot to treat people like workers. They didn't. They talked in the abstract about unions and backbone of America, et cetera, et cetera. But then they condescended and said, but we're going to divide you up by race and by union membership and by all these different gradations. And that was sort of Trump's genius. He spoke to those workers as workers. He didn't care what color they were, what identity they adopted. And that's actually where his background as a admittedly dodgy businessman nevertheless was a contrast, because neither Waltz nor Harris has ever worked in private industry, has never had to make a payroll. And there was some way in which they spoke that it was so far away from discussing free enterprise or how the economy works.
But or Joe Biden, for that matter. So we should get to that too, because
they're good at spending your money, but they don't actually understand how.
They're not even good at spending it, because let's just talk, not federal money.
Well, no, exactly. She went in debt for her campaign.
There's one salient detail that we got last night, Nib. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. Her campaign raised $1 billion in 3 months and has ended up $20 million in debt. Now, that is a synecdoche for American post-FDR liberalism, if I have ever seen it. I don't even know how a campaign spends $1 billion in 3 months. Did it hire 25,000 people at $100,000 a year?
Those
It
celebrity
is.
appearances aren't cheap, nor are the TikTok influencer brigades. They all have to
Nor
be
is
paid.
David Plouffe and whoever else. I mean, they did hire expensive
Yeah, but you
people
can't. I'm saying
who sat there and said, "We're in a hole really deep." Well, thank you. That's why I
The
$1
paid.
billion
advertising budget,
is
though.
a lot of money, right? That's really an enormous amount of money, even if you have an operation with 20,000 people in it that works full time for 3 months. Your payroll isn't going to hit that. Your benefits aren't going to hit that. Your ad time is going to be your ad time. It is an astounding fact that she did this and that all of that money was wasted. And it's wasted in part because when it's flowing like water, like the federal government, you forget that you're supposed to have accountability for what goes out in the checkbook to the people who were gracious enough or generous enough to give it to you in the first place. Abe, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to add to two things. One, the Bernie, I think, is also right in the drum that he's been beating for a while, which is that the Democratic Party's balance between identity concerns and economic concerns is way out of whack. He's been on that point for a long time, saying we've got to be on the economic issue, not the identity. Although he's happy to back whatever identity cause comes his way, he's clearly frustrated with the identitarian shift in the party, and he's right.
Okay, so Trump builds this coalition, right? He has this ocean of support from Latinos and particularly from Latino males. As Christine said, he won Americans who make less money and all of that. And Democrats saying they're going, we're the party of unions. We're the party that wants to give you a fair shake. But this is a trick. And what's more, the American people know it's a trick because they've been living through it for many decades. There was a time 40, 50 years ago that a relatively substantial number of people in the United States were in unions. And they didn't like being in unions. They didn't like the political acts of the unions they were in or the incredible financial corruptions of the unions they were in. They were not permitted to exit unions to remain employed. And it was a jujitsu effect of the Republican Party from the 1960s through the 1990s that union workers voted for Nixon and Reagan and Bush and didn't vote for McGovern and Carter in 80 or Mondale or Dukakis, and then started moving back to Clinton a little bit, although a lot of them went to Perot. They were not culturally where their unions were. Now it's 2024, and somewhere between 11 and 12% of the entire American workforce is unionized, and more than 50% of them are public sector workers whose economic interests, of course, all involve the free flow of government money, the raising of taxes to get money to them. Less than 7% of the American workforce in the United States belongs to unions, the private sector workforce. So all we hear about is unions. 93% of the American workforce, of the private sector workforce, is not unionized. They are using the word union to do all this work that is intended to gull the gentry class into thinking that as it's voting for all of the social issues that they like, that what they're actually doing is they're doing it for
And
for
to
the
add to that,
unions.
this is why I think, in retrospect, the giveaway for the college student loan giveaway, it's not debt relief. You all know I hate it when people call it debt relief. The debt transfer, which was struck down as unconstitutional and which Biden boasted he was going to defy the Supreme Court on, those continual efforts to have red state America pay off blue states loans, which is, I think, how a lot of people who didn't go to college see that program. It's like, wait a minute, I'm not getting a break for the cost of my tools or the cost of my apprentice program. And they have a, in the most extreme case, you're a gender studies major and I have to pay off your PhD loan. That was how people saw it. And you know what? Some of the best ads earlier in the campaign season were comparing the plumber to the, dance and movement therapist degree and saying, okay, who here is contributing most to society? That really bothered, I think, voters who might otherwise think their economic interest would lie with the Democratic Party.
So I mentioned yesterday Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas, which famously suggested that the American, sort of the working class in the United States and the less affluent in the United States were being gulled to voting for Republicans because they were being seduced or hypnotized by culture war issues. And I think it's a ridiculous argument, but there was more purchase to it when he made it than there is now, because there appears to be some kind of maybe it's not a class war, but there is a class friction in the United States between the interest of people who are in the Democratic camp and the people who are not solidly in the Democratic camp or who are in the Republican camp. And I don't mean because Republicans like billionaires or whatever. I mean that they want things that are of no use or no help to people who are struggling. And what they want are luxury goods provided at some discount, like shopping at a pret-a-porter website so you can buy expensive clothing at 40% discount. They want the government to help them discount college tuition or discount expensive homes or discount the cost of living in a high tax state like New York with the STAR deduction. Discount they should. It's fine. They're pursuing their own economic interests. But none of that is of any good to a car mechanic whatsoever. And what's more, and then of course we had the real world fact that when there was this once in a century crisis, the less well-to-do all had to stay at their posts while everybody else got to go inside and order food that they delivered like they were the serfs coming in from the fields, bringing the produce into the kitchen in the basement of the manor house. And that lingered. I still think that that lingered. And
well, can I give the simple caveman pundit explanation? People don't like it when prices go up 20% over 4 years and their incomes aren't going up to match it. And so they're treading water or actually falling behind as groceries are more expensive, as car payments go up, as it becomes almost impossible to buy your first home because of interest rates. Pretty simple. People don't like it when the border is completely insecure and record numbers of illegal immigrants enter the United States, millions over the first 3 years of the Biden presidency. And if you're in one of the communities where the immigrants were sent, you have to deal with, I'm not talking about missing pets, I'm talking about overcrowded schools, I'm talking about social welfare payments that go up, I'm talking about, in some cases, criminality, and I'm talking about just the social process of assimilation. I'm for it. It's difficult, right? That's pretty simple. Oh, no. Oh, and then by the way, what the people in charge are telling you after 4 years of this, everything is fine. Everything is fine. And freedom and Beyonce is on my side. And we're going to protect women's rights to choose and LGBT rights. And look, you might want to protect both of those things, but in the calculus of consent, which is higher?
But those are
Can I
luxuries.
say
That's
something about
exactly
the
socially.
assimilation?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Something about the assimilation point that Matt is making, which is that here in Montgomery County, Maryland, was the sort of ground zero for the fight over allowing allowing parents of school children to opt their children out of lessons that contained social lessons or other thing, culture war stuff that they didn't want their kids to see. And the coalition that came out against it was very non-white and heavily immigrant or recent immigrant or populations with a lot of immigrants in them, right? And so you talk to these people after the election and you hear the same sort of thing. Donald Trump did better and kept doing better among non-white, various non-white subgroups. And one of the things that these parents said was, we want our children to have an education that prepares them because we are new. My kid is the first born in America in my family, right? This is a new thing. We don't care about, the rainbow puppy stuff that you're doing. And the concern is not because we don't like gay or trans children or something like that. It's not that at all. When you ask Ethiopian Christians and Muslims here in Montgomery County, you get the same answer as when you ask white Catholics here in Montgomery County, which is education is a tool for a specific purpose. And so when we talk about the basket weavers, Christine, the person who majored in basket weaving getting bailed out by the plumber who went to trade school, I think that concern is starting much earlier now for parents. It's not just if I'm sending them to college, are they going to learn anything? It's my kid is 10 years old and they seem to be preparing him for a career in politics, and that's it.
Okay, so and this stretches. Let's follow along the parents' journey. Now, a lot of people in America aren't parents. My guess is when we get this data, which takes these data, which take time to compile because they're not really collected in the right way, that we are going to see this marriage, non-marriage, parent, non-parent gap in the results that will be even more radical than some of the other data that we're seeing. Like, we know now that the Republican Party is the party of married people and the Democratic Party is the party of single people, most very broadly defined, because there are many single people who vote Republican and many married people who vote Democrat. But that these are the sort of core bases, and that so the parent people have what happens when you have a baby as they go through life. What is it like when they start going to school? How do you pay for childcare? Where is the school? What's the school like? Is it safe? Are they learning anything? And then as they go through, you have the same issues in intermediate school. You have the same issues in high school. Safety, social cohesion. Are the kids being taught right? Are the teachers behaving well? Or is there a pedophile in the woodpile? Are all of these kinds of worries that are completely divorced from anything that anybody else has. And then you start getting into the people who actually want to send their kids to college. And that's where things get fascinating in terms of sotto voce messages that the again gentry media either don't want to cover or don't pay attention to. And that's the Harvard and University of North Carolina affirmative action cases. Because what was that about? That was about denying entry at the highest levels of American education to immigrant and not very well-to-do minority children in favor of somebody else. Legacy admissions, African Americans who don't perform as well, but whose existence on campus is deeply emotionally important to the people who make up the classes and sort of invent the populations on the campuses that they want. And this sense from the beginning that the teachers aren't interested in educating, The educators aren't interested in running institutions that work for the benefit of the children, and that the system, as you get deeper into it or commit to it, because you're going to put your kid through college and pay for whatever it is, that this system is actually designed against the interests of the people who need it the most. Who needs college the least? I mean, I would argue that sort of like my kids, Christine's, our kids need college 100 times less, though they are 100 times more likely than a J.D. Vance type in Middletown, Ohio, or the kid of a dry cleaner in Flushing, Queens, who studies 5 hours a day, gets 1450 on his boards, is a straight A student, and then mysteriously doesn't get into Harvard or Yale or Princeton, and the internal email traffic says they're colorless. They don't have the right, they just don't fit in our world. And minorities everywhere, when they get the word that the word of the elites is that there's something about them that is just non-you, just as the Mitford family put it, it's just non-you. That's the rigged system that Donald Trump talked about, and there is an entire cohort in the United States that is gigantic, that is living through this for 2 decades.
Well,
with
we
each
should
kid.
add that those most elite institutions, basically the Ivy and Ivy Plus institutions, also generate the vast majority of people who run our cultural and political institutions. But if you look at who runs Fortune 500 companies, even mid-range to small businesses, they have college degrees as well, but they tend not to be as likely to have come out of those Ivy Plus institutions. So there is, even within the college education system, there is a strange sort of sorting going on where the cultural and political institutions are producing a very hyper elite class. But the people who, again, generate wealth, create enterprise, do all these things, they are not, some do, but a larger number come from state universities, from mid-tier universities. And
that's very important socially as an explanation, because who are such people? They are strivers. They are people who are develop mettle and resilience and the ability to navigate through hostile or unfriendly or not particularly interested in coddling them institutions, which include the military, or include a gigantic colorless state school, or include a corporation where they get a job early on that it's not really directed at trying to satisfy their wants and needs and provide them with the kind of worthy working experience that really will make them grow.
It's a paycheck.
Yeah, they're supposed to be there to make money for the company that they're at, however that company defines it.
I mean, I think this is all very interesting, but again, there's a.
Are you going back to? Are you going to be Unfrozen Caveman?
I am still Unfrozen Caveman Pundit here. Okay. Harris is the first Democrat to lose the popular vote in 20 years.
No, let's talk about
she lost ground. She lost ground compared to Biden among every single group.
Right.
I think except young women. I think it's the only.
Well, that's clearly because she's a black woman, and we're a racist country and misogynist.
College-educated women, right? College-educated women. That the group that you've been talking about, right? Yeah. But if you just kind of take a step back, you say, look, what was the most important issue? It was the economy, and Trump had a huge advantage on it. What was the second most important issue in the mix? No, it was immigration. Trump had a huge advantage on it. The groups, especially among the Hispanic voter shift toward Trump, is, for me, the story of the election. And it's interesting because if you think about the Hispanic population in the United States, I mean, it's such a bad term. We need to be much more granular. I mean, because you think about recent immigrants from Cuba and Venezuela, they do not want socialism in the United States, right? They do. They look at the record of appeasement on foreign policy that the Democrats have, They don't want that at all. Legal immigrants. We talked about Lily Tang Williams earlier in the week. They hate this idea that their families went through this long, drawn out legal process that takes years. And then you have to go through all these bureaucratic hoops to get a green card. And then you have your time limit before you can apply for citizenship. Whereas, meanwhile, these people are walking across the border after paying a cartel that's probably also shipping fentanyl thousands of dollars. And, all right, we'll judge your asylum claim in 5 years. By which time, if Harris was elected, your status probably be regularized somehow, right? So the combination of the issue set, the fact that you had a candidate who was installed at the last minute, who just had never demonstrated any talent in assembling a coalition, I think it's pretty clear how this campaign was won. And just one final note on the composition of the electorate. It is interesting. Domenico Montanaro of NPR pointed out that this is the first time since 1992 that the share of white voters in the electorate went up. And that, I think, is the mirror image of a decline in certain parts of minority turnout. In particular, the idea that black voters did not turn out as much as usual. But you know why? Because Harris gave them no reason to turn out. There was no reason to be enthusiastic about what Harris was offering because of the record that was so poor, and because her vision of the country was so vague, and her descriptions of herself were so unconvincing.
I think when Matt brought up the fact that Harris was installed at the last second, all of us here, when that happened and when Biden melted down on stage prior to that, we thought that it would or should be a scandal that there was a president who was being propped up, whose failings were being hidden, and we wanted to know, and we assumed the American people wanted to know who knew how much about this and when, and what was involved in covering it up. And we, at least I, expected a sort of scandal about that, and it never seemed to materialize. Maybe it was a hidden scandal after all, though, in that it brought down the voting public's trust in the party, especially when followed up with the Kamala Waltz performances that also made people think, what are we listening to? What are they actually saying? What do they stand for? Where is there an answer in any of this?
Well, let's dovetail. We can dovetail these two, because Matt's saying, okay, look, here's inflation. I can't even afford a used car. Used cars went up 30, 40% in value. Used to be you could buy a used car for $1,000. I can't even find a used car for $1,000 for my kid. Like, this is crazy, right? I can't afford a house because there's been a wild run up in housing costs, even as inflation rates were declining. And of course, there are supermarket costs and all of that. So Harris starts running for office and says, I understand that inflation is too high. So here is what I am going to do. I am going to blame people who own grocery stores because they're screwing with you and gouging you. And the government is going to write you a check or provide you with a tax deduction of 25,000 whole dollars over the course of a 30-year mortgage in some fashion or other to help you buy your first home. And I think people listened to that and heard that and said, this is a lot of bullshit, because it's not the fault of Manny, the supermarket manager, that butter costs 3 times what it cost last year. That doesn't, I'm sorry. I do something where I work and I've had to increase prices because my suppliers are doing X, or the place I work has had to increase the cost of the good that I either help produce or I help sell or whatever. This does not pass the smell test. There's something wrong with the economy. You're not telling me what it is.
Well, and worse, it's worse than that. Sorry, Abe, I keep stealing your line. For the previous 3 years, they'd been told there's nothing wrong with it. The problem is your perception of it. And that's another, that form of gaslighting is remembered by people who are then offered a sort of, as you say, meager proposal for fixing the damage that they know has been caused.
It's not even meager. It's dishonest or factitious. People know that grocery prices aren't high because the grocer is trying to gouge them. What in what universe? What is this, a war? Like we're living through, it's like there's a flood, and so there's one supermarket open, and so he can sell water for $25 a gallon. This is just your ordinary Piggly Wiggly on the, in the mall, and the eggs are $3 more expensive.
Right. On top of that, you had a nominee for the Democrats who decided to make her closing argument, not in Pennsylvania, not in Michigan or Wisconsin, not even in Georgia or North Carolina, but in Washington, D.C., in a location which will have voted for Kamala Harris by what, like 96 to 4?
I think it's almost like 98. It was
98
like
to
you're
2,
living in a place,
right?
That
tells you everything you need to know about American politics, right?
That's going right to your base, though.
It is. No, that's what I'm saying.
You're not even going to have a protester there.
Because there's no protests. You're going to get a crowd, and you do it in front of the White House because something in your data is showing people aren't quite comfortable with her in the White House. And of course, you as part of the Harris campaign interpret this as saying, oh, it means they can't picture a woman in the White House. No, it means people can't picture Kamala Harris in the White House because she's given them no reason to think that she is up for the job, right? I mean, and has never provided any distinction between herself and a president whose approval rating in the early exit poll, was 41%. And look, we all say, on election night, we always say, don't trust the early exits. And of course, then we all kind of secretly look at them. Or John, you publicly look at them. You were tweeting them out. But what I did too, I secretly did. And when I saw that Biden's approval was 41%, that was the first sign to me to say, that's not really good for her.
Okay, but there's another interesting point in CNN.
But also, this is like this is the McDonald's question too, is it not? I mean, it's not like, I believe she worked at McDonald's, or why would she lie about it? It's like we had this debate because we were looking for a scrap of evidence that she had working experience.
Right. And the only evidence provided by the campaign to the New York Times after the brilliant reporting of the Washington Free Beacon was her close friend who said that she had heard from Shamala, the late mother, that this job had happened.
Oh, I thought you were calling Kamala Shamala, but you're actually referring to Shamala.
Yes, to
the mother.
Shamala.
Yes,
and that's there's it's not like
that's not really convincing testimony.
Maybe she didn't work at McDonald's, but she worked, at the Gap outlet like I did. I was the Gap greeting troll as a teenager. So there was no other she also did this odd job, or it was like.
And who would? By the way, who would
have any relationship at all to it? Maybe why wouldn't you just at McDonald's?
Why would you just say it though?
First of all, 1 in 7 people in America had their first job at McDonald's. 1 in 8, I think. That when I was a kid, it was 1 in 4. Countries change, but teenagers went and folded sweaters at the Gap. My wife worked at the Gap.
Yeah.
I worked at a movie theater.
You worked at a movie theater. I was a busboy for a while. It's not like this is hard. It's not hard.
But this is
all the experience of the contemporary Democratic Party, though, and its children,
right?
Its
or
children
our children
do not work those.
Yeah, I know. It's true. Well, a lot of them don't because it's too expensive to employ a kid. I mean, that's actually the part of the story which we could also, if we were not being unfrozen caveman lawyer and getting into tertiary sorts of issues that favor
Sorry,
Trump.
I interrupted Abe though.
But this is why I say that the Biden cognition cover-up, I think, was an element in all of this, in creating this murk, where, as Seth says, it left people looking for scraps of evidence. That's not a good place for a ticket to be in. Scraps of evidence all over the place, not just McDonald's, but
She has. What do we know about her? She grew up in a middle-class family, and according to her, she has a Glock and is prepared
there you go.
to use it.
Right.
And I'm sorry, but even there, the utter factitiousness of her life is exposed in raw form, because Glock schmuck.
I know how you feel
Got a
about
Glock
that.
because she was a DA. I don't know. I assume that's probably not true.
She's in law enforcement.
When you are the child of an economics professor and a cancer researcher, you may be nominally in the middle class. I was the child of a magazine editor, two magazine editors, and we lived in a rent-controlled apartment, and my parents spent 60% of their income on private schooling in New York City because the local school was too unsafe. So we were a middle-class family. But would you really describe the editor of Commentary Magazine and an executive editor of Harper's Magazine who write books and live on the Upper West Side and, are friends with Norman Mailer and Pat Moynihan? Would you describe them as a middle-class family? I could do that. I could play that game. I could say I grew up in a middle-class family. We had a table. Our dining room table was from the door store. It was a door, on legs that you put a tablecloth on. But whatever I am not the child of a middle-class family just like you. I'm a Jew from the Upper West Side. She was an immigrant. She was a child of two immigrants, one from India, one from Jamaica, who were obviously remarkable people in their own right. And she was claiming a more modest social status than she had. And boy, I'm sorry, people really hate that. It's not like I'm like you because I want to be like you, or it's more like, you know what, I didn't grow up with the difficulties you have, and I am grateful that, and I want to make sure that you have what I had. What about
the best
that?
move is that then they tried to cast Vance as a
as
child of privilege.
I know.
It's like, what?
Yeah. Well, that's a complicated story, as if you read Kevin Williamson's review of
Tim Walz was like, none of my students went to Yale.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because he brought them all to China.
Yeah. He turned them all into agents of the communist regime in China. No, but I'm just saying that the inauthenticity stuff goes beyond the, the merely, all of that. It is like the whole thing was a trick. Biden was senile. She's an idiot. She's a very unimpressive person. She spent her entire life standing on the shoulders of other people, getting jobs that she probably wasn't entirely suitable for or qualified for, pulled across the finish line in elections in a state where once she got on the ballot where she was, there was going to be no contesting them. One time in her life, she took a giant risk and ran for president and raised a huge amount of money and exploded on the launch pad.
But this
a slow
is why
9-month explosion on the launch pad where first one rocket failed and then the other rocket failed. Yes.
This is the reckoning, I think. This is where I actually have a little bit of sympathy for Kamala Harris, the person. There has been no experience in her life where she was at all mentally prepared for the fact that the Democratic Party, especially in blue state California, which had, as you said, swept her along on a brilliant career, and she'd been told, wow, you're amazing, you're the future, it's incredible, now you're a senator, now you're this, now you're that. She was not mentally prepared for the fact that her own party's coalition, it's like termite. Termites had attacked and rotted them from within, and it just crumbled because it's not just her or her campaign. The entire Democratic Party apparatus assumed they could take for granted the coalition that worked for Obama, that kind of worked in its odd way for Biden, and it doesn't work anymore. And so that's a reckoning that they have to have. I doubt they'll do it, although there have been a few voices that already have said we need to look at why we're not reaching the same multiracial coalition. Okay. But she was literally not prepared. No one prepared her for this.
I think it's gaslighting. It's gaslighting all the way down. And, this from the very start, from the very start where, oh, this is a seasonal migration at the southern border.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the very start. Inflation's going to be temporary. Don't worry about it. What are you talking about, Afghanistan? This is the biggest success we've had in foreign policy in years, getting our people out.
But
They've been lying for 4 years, and they lied about her, and the people just saw through it.
Matt, you call it gaslighting. So
Yes.
this, I think, is a very important detail going forward about how the Democratic Party is going to examine what happened here, which is, did they know it wasn't seasonal? Did they know that inflation wasn't temporary? Did they know that Afghanistan was a failure? Or were they gaslighting themselves then? And so if they were gaslighting themselves, then they were telling the truth to the American people as they understood it, because they were high on their own supply. The reason I say this is important is that after 2012, most important political thing that happened to the Republican Party after 2012 is that people like us, Paul Ryan, and the head of the RNC, and Michael Steele, and everybody said, we need to understand why our message isn't working. And so they wrote the autopsy.
Yes.
And the autopsy said, we need to be nicer to immigrants. We need to be more open on this. And we need to appeal more to women. And we need to all that. Okay. And everybody sort of took it in and subsumed it. Except the people in the party who actually had to face voters, and this started in 2013, meaning members of the House, get the autopsy. And it says, be nicer to immigrants. And they're like, I hate to put it this way because I don't really mean it, but it's like, we're not going to be nicer. Are you crazy? Do you know what phone calls I get? This is before the border crisis. We're talking about before Obama, before the beginning of the 14-15
right.
border
I mean,
crisis.
it's not nicer to immigrants. It's we need to help Obama pass an immigration bill that would include an amnesty. I mean, that was what I was told by an NPR anchor on election night, 2012. He said to me, well, this just means that you conservatives have to support comprehensive immigration reform. And I looked at him and I said, it does not mean that at all.
Right.
Quite the opposite.
Right. But my point is that the brain trust of the Republican Party and very serious people whom I respect looked at the data and said, these are our weaknesses as revealed by this data. And so therefore, this is, if you were going to sort of try to figure out where you needed to ballast yourself because you were losing support in these areas, this is what you would really need to address. Also unwritten was, and we just get shellacked. We get shellacked every day by the media. We get shellacked. We're called racist and we're called sexist and we're called all these names. And maybe if we do some of this stuff, the shellacking will stop. They'll let up on us. It'll be easier to go on the Sunday shows and be in the green room. We'll get asked questions we like better. So maybe we can quiet a lot of this down. But I was struck by the fact that when this happened in 2013, that was when the signs began to show that this conventional race that we thought was going to happen in 2016, that we were all excited about because there were so many really interesting first-rate Republican political talent, just pouring through, ready to get in the paddock and run that race. Senators from all over, governors from all over the country, Scott Walker and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. And I mean, I can't even, Christie and this one, that. It was going to be just amazing. But people on the front lines in the House of Representatives said, basically without saying it, you people are crazy. This is suicide for me. You want me to advocate something that 80% of the people in my district are already incredibly uncomfortable with? Where are you living? And then happened, the first big sign of that was the race in Virginia, where the number two person in the House, who was up in a poll a month before by 34 points against a nobody, Laura Ingraham, puts Dave Bratt on her show and says Eric Cantor's bad, this guy is good, and then comes the primary, and the number 2 person in the House is defeated in a primary by a guy who was on Laura Ingram's show one day. Like, all kinds of signals that the top-down idea of how to fix things was present. So, Democrats, 2024, here comes this election. They lose by exactly the same percentage that Romney lost by. And she's going to end up losing about the same number of votes off the whatever. I mean, she's going to end up with 75 million votes as opposed to Biden's 81 million votes. And there's going to have to be an autopsy, and there will be an autopsy. I don't think the autopsy will be the Republican version of it, which is let's move toward where
Do you think there will be an autopsy? I don't think there will be an autopsy.
Okay, let's say there's not an autopsy. My point is, what happened inside the Republican Party was that the Republican Party shifted more decisively toward the issues that were at its heart, that were what its heart and not its brain was telling them. That is exactly what's going to happen in the Democratic Party. So if you think the Democratic Party is going to moderate, if you think that it's going to move toward Trump on immigration, or that it's going to move toward, it will stop. It'll talk less about trans issues. I believe that to be the case.
Well, that's what's at the center of the blame Biden thing, right? Because blaming Biden means blaming the moderate who tried to, the so-called moderate who tried to work with Republicans, and Kamala represents the other wing of the party and whatever. And blaming Biden is a way of blaming that sort of moderation, even though you could say 4 years earlier.
Yeah, but Biden worked with Republicans in Congress, but he was also calling Republican voters the descendants of Jim Crow and fascist threats to democracy.
Democratic active progressives won't say that, and they don't think of it that way. What I'm saying, the progressives will say, he pitched himself as moderate. That's a big.
Well, this is like Romney. They'll say, right.
This brings up there's another faction of Democratic finger pointers here that we haven't brought up on the left, and these are the folks saying, this is what happens when you support genocide in Israel. And by the way, some of this is being echoed on TV.
Peter
Beinert's at it already.
Absolutely. This is how you lose the youth. This is how you lose African Americans. Meanwhile, both of who moved to Trump in record numbers because Trump is
so good. Is so good on Israel and God. Like, he is really,
from their perspective.
He is so unsupportive of Israel that increasing amounts of data are demonstrating that he got 45% of the Jewish vote in New York State for the first time since 1980. Okay. My point here is that if you're looking for the Democratic Party to take a good, long, hard look at what happened here and try to fix what happened in terms of its economic policies, its immigration policies, and its foreign policies. If you think that that's going to happen, and what's going to happen is that Josh Shapiro is going to be the nominee in 2028. I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. The nominee will be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Well,
and
she's going to run
the race that they are going to want to run.
She'll run.
Trump had to come from outside. They don't have to come from outside. Josh Shapiro and John Fetterman and people like that are not the future of the Democratic Party. They may be Phil Gramm. They may end up in the Republican Party over time, which is what happened after the Reagan shift.
I mean, we're 48 hours from the 2024 election. We have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean,
I'm telling
we haven't heard from Trump
I am telling you right now that if you had $1 million to bet, if I said to you,
my God, I'd be bankrupt.
I'm putting a gun to your head, and you have to bet who's the nominee, Shapiro or AOC.
Yeah, I say
I'm putting a gun to your head.
I say
That's
neither.
not. I'm sorry. That's not an option.
You don't have a Glock. You don't have Kamala's Glock. You can't put it in my head, John, on this podcast.
Okay. I'm
You know
just
how to
joking,
fix
but
the
I'm just saying.
response rate problem. You know how to fix the response rate problem of polls? You put a gun to someone's head.
Yeah, right.
History demonstrates that parties, when they are wounded,
Right.
go back into their dens and
I
lick their wounds.
completely agree, and
They
I do
not
think
lick.
AOC took one step closer to a presidential run after election day. I do agree with that, because I think if you look at her performance at the convention, the way they deployed her in the last minute to appeal to young men playing video games, she's clearly, she has something special about her. She always has.
Yeah.
But she's also, I think, has a ceiling as well because of her ideology and her personality.
I am saying that from 72, when Democrats got 37% of the vote, and then there was this exogenous.
Well, but then there was Carter, right? I mean, then it was someone again if we had been speaking 2 days after the 72 election, and you put the gun to my head, I would not have thought of Jimmy Carter. Yeah, exactly. The peanut farmer.
But that's exactly right, because that's where, when my kids say to me, who's going to be the Democratic nominee in 28, I say I have no idea, because we had no idea that Obama would be the nominee in 2004. We had no idea that Trump was going to.
Outsider can come in.
Trump hasn't talked. It's amazing. Trump has been silent since the speech on election night. I mean, what he's going to dictate what happens on both parties.
Golf with Byron DeChambeau.
Well, I think he's relaxing. Yeah, right.
He's on the phone with Elon Musk, talking for the 87th time about how amazing it was that rocket got caught on the gantry. Like, we've
got 4 more years.
There's no way of knowing, but I'm saying that the party itself emotionally is not going to, what do we need to do to go out and win elections in this changed political environment? That will happen. They're going to need to lose more, right? The DLC and Bill Clinton, that was 12 years after Reagan.
They have to get away from the media. I mean, the
identity
between the media and the Democratic Party is perfect, and that is hurting the Democratic Party.
Right.
That is no doubt about that. And how you escape the media when you are so entwined with it, and when it intersects with the things we were talking about earlier today about educational attainment and class, and I think it's a very hard trick they're going to have to pull. But that doesn't mean there will be someone who emerges in the next 2 years who sees through it, or is at least able to say, okay, I'm not going to do what the media tells me. And I will make one prediction definitively. Whoever this mystery person is, it is not Pete Buttigieg, my least favorite Democrat in the United States. It is not Pete.
Is he your least favorite?
I think he may be.
Okay,
There's a lot of competition.
Larry Krasner is my least favorite. I just want to shout out Larry Krasner, the DA of Philadelphia, who literally will not arrest a single person for a criminal offense in Philadelphia, but threatened anyone who might do anything on election day with handcuffs and solitary confinement should they do anything to disrupt the vote in Philadelphia. He was like Javert if you were going to do something at the ballot box, but if you mug someone on the steps of the school where the voting machine is, you're looped. So just go mug everybody, but give them an I voted sticker, and you are cool with Larry Krasner. He is everything that is wrong with the Democrats. So he would be my least favorite, a Democrat. But let's talk about Trump. We went in this direction because it's fun, but we could now talk about the Trump victory. So first of all, it's an astonishing thing, but it is 312 electoral votes, and it is a little less than 51% of the vote. So it's not Reagan. It's not a 49 state landslide. It's the greatest political comeback in America, or according to Neil Ferguson, the greatest comeback since the resurrection of Christ. literally what Neil Ferguson said in the Free Press, because he said he was thinking, he thought maybe Napoleon.
They got the same number of electoral votes, by the way.
But Napoleon came back from Elba, but he only lasted 3 months before he was defeated at Waterloo and then sent to St. Helena. So this is going to be better than Napoleon's comeback. But so the greatest will come back, but it's still within the realm of the very divided nation, in which there's going to be a 2-seat majority in the House either way, probably Republican. I think right now people are thinking it'll be Republican, but it'll be 2 seats, and then 2 people die unexpectedly and there are special elections, or there's a Democratic governor and this whatever, and that could flip over. 53 seats in the House, in the Senate, probably. Reagan got 55. It's in the realm of an understandable election that was decisively won, but not won. It's epical, but the epical stuff is a trend line. And the trend line was president in 2020 when Trump lost, got 11 million more votes in 20. And all of these things that we've seen, this growth in urban, the growth with Latino men, the growth with black men, and then outsized results in places where he lost, but lost by less, was present in 2020. New York, Chicago, some of these cities. But where it really showed was in 22, right? 5 districts in New York where Republicans unexpectedly won House seats because this growing coalition started to express itself, and that everybody attributed to COVID, but I still think COVID is playing a role now. So Trump is showing this growth, right? Moves in all of these counties and urban counties, 15%, 20% toward Trump. And this started then and is moving on. So the question is, are we seeing an evolutionary American change that is a complete rebalancing of American politics? Or is it all Trump personally, not the Republican Party? And he's gone in 2028. And I'm not saying it reverts, because I don't think anything ever really reverts, but it could freeze in place.
So,
it could, yeah.
These are the questions. Clearly, there's a lot about Trump the person, and it remains to be seen whether that can transfer to another candidate in the years ahead. I think there's also some evolutionary stuff happening, because the long-running trend due to educational polarization, that's real. That's independent of Trump, and it's likely to continue as long as the Democratic Party continues to be led by this progressive media elite, which is just completely out of touch with the rest of the country. But I would say as well that, in 2008, I'll just end with this anecdote. 2008, very bad night for Republicans. I wrote a piece after that election saying it's doomed, future very bleak, because of the rising American electorate, as Ron Brownstein would say. And I remember running into my editor, Fred Barnes, one of my mentors, and he was like, "I read your piece." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "The Republicans will come back. They always do." And,
Fred, by the way, was the original unfrozen caveman.
Yeah,
pundit.
I know. That's why I emulate him.
He was like, you know what? Things happen.
Yeah, things
it
happen.
happens, and then things change back.
And in fact, he was totally right.
Yeah.
And they're going to change back again. Okay. So that's kind of my perspective. And people always misread their mandate, and we have no idea what Trump is going to do, or even what his administration is going to look like. So we have to have some humility here. But what we can say, finally, is that since 2000, American politics has been narrowly but deeply divided. And this election, you can see shifts that say, well, it's moving to the right, the country, but it's still 50, rounding up, it's still going to be 50, 51-47 or so, 51-48, it's still what Michael Barone called the 49% nation. And that, I think, will persist at least 2 years down the road, if not 4.
And to use this analogy, the last 51, so Romney was 51-47, but Bush in 2004 won 51-48, won by one state, won by Ohio, 286 electoral votes. And this is what Trump needs to guard against, the Republicans need to guard against, and that maybe Obama needed to guard against, although he kind of did, which is this. Bush wins. He wins by saying the war in Iraq is the same war as 9/11. You trusted me. You liked what I did on 9/11. Trust me on Iraq. Then he's elected. And what does he do? He says, we are transforming the world into a home for democracy and freedom. Now, the speech itself said this is going to take 100 years. It's been widely misinterpreted. And I still think it's a very good speech, the second inaugural. But he wins 51-48 with a war that is a 50-50 war. And he says, we're transforming the world into a haven of democracy, and we are going to reform Social Security. What he said he was going to do was win the war in Iraq. When he started to govern, he said, I'm going to transform Social Security and turn the world into a haven for democracy. And that's when it all started to go wrong, because he made one promise and then he was like, I want to do other stuff. He didn't run on Social Security. So it would be like Trump coming in and saying, I just won this election. It's amazing. Now, to be fair, Trump said a lot of radical stuff. He wants to deport 15 million people. He wants to put 20% tariffs on, stuff like that. So almost anything else that he would do would be more moderate or less, whatever than what he might decide to implement. But there is a temptation to say, I just won, so I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to. And that's not smart, because the public is watching and they didn't give you 60% of the vote so that the other party is like, oh my God, we're dead in the water here. And so that would be my warning. I don't know what that is.
The thing that Trump will benefit from here is that whatever he does, even if he oversteps, whatever he does will not be what the Democrats have been warning that he's going to do, which is transform the country overnight into a tyrannical dystopia. And he won't do that, but his critics will keep saying he's doing that. And I think we know, as a result of this election, that doesn't work for the critics. I think most people see the difference between what Trump's detractors say he is and what he is. They may not be sure what he is, but they're pretty sure that he's not what they say he is. And he will benefit from that, at least.
Well, Christine, this goes to the point that Matt was making. You're going to be writing about actually for our December issue, which is that Trump will be an enemy of the media. The media will treat him as an enemy. He's not allowed to call them his enemy or to say that they're the enemy of the people, but they're allowed to say that he's a fascist. So he kind of gets a free shot now for a long time against them. But what is it that he needs to guard against in terms of, now that we know that the media may have actually played a role in injuring Democratic prospects by not giving them a picture of the world that was the world they needed to run in to try to win this election? What is it that Trump, knowing the opposite, which is that, yes, they were they were implicitly almost a help to him. What does he need to guard against in terms of how he moves forward and gets this feedback loop where it's like, oh, they're saying I'm a fascist, therefore I must be doing something right?
Right. Well, that the right of center media ecosystem, which now thankfully exists and is thriving, and as well as the sort of independent, a smaller independent ecosystem of media, he has to be careful not to stay comfortably in that bubble. He actually, and it's not as if he needs to listen to what the mainstream media is saying. They will, I agree with Abe, anything he does will be fascist in their view. They are, I would imagine, going to line up again as part of the resistance, as they did during his first term, which not only is shooting themselves in the foot, but is, not journalism. Though he likes to be flattered. I think temperamentally it suits him to only surround himself with positive coverage. And he's going to need to hear some hard truths from the voters who, as we discussed earlier, chose him because he wasn't the Democratic machine, but are still perhaps uncertain about how he's going to govern the second time around. So maybe the voter who cares a lot about the economy is very different from the one who cares a lot about wanting a more isolationist America. But he needs to have not combative, but tough questioning from his own friendly media in a way that I think, given his odd relationship with Fox News in particular during this last campaign, is possible, but he's got to be open to it. So I would say, in his first term, he brought in some friendly media folks into his administration and for communication purposes. He needs to be more of a professional politician in that regard. He needs to do what J.D. Vance, his running mate, did very well, the mirror image of that, which is to go into the lion's den often and just play, respond with a very, very good performances over and over again. I think that shows confidence. I think it, particularly in contrast with Kamala Harris, it showed a stark contrast in how the campaigns dealt with the media. He needs a somewhat hostile media to keep him focused on what his voters put him back in the White House to do. And whether he can manage that, I'm not sure. Again, temperamentally, I wouldn't bet on that happening. And the conservative media needs to do its role too now. The defensive crouch that conservatives have long been in with regard to mainstream media needs to shift now, because he won despite the fact that the media ran against him too. And so that's a lesson for us as conservatives about the way we communicate messages, the way we hold our own elected officials to account.
Well, I guess that's also a question for the conservative media, by which I mean he has demonstrated the hollowness of what we call the mainstream media. And that hollowness, by the way, is structural and is only getting worse.
Yes. And it's convenient for conservatives to blame the media.
Very much. No, but I mean, it's structural and getting worse. And the power of the alternative media is rising to such an extent that there will maybe a point in the next 3 or 4 years where calling it the alternative media will be a misnomer. That we will have, there were parallel medias, and that the media of the right is a media that is direct, is totally in a direct connection to its consumer, right?
Like, look, I want him to go on Joe Rogan annually and have Rogan really grill him. And I want Rogan to grill him, not, to push back, and do all the things. That's actually a healthy environment.
And the Daily Wire. And, and all of that. Okay. So, but there may be these two, parallel media, and but they're also converging, because the mainstream media used to have a source of support that is dead, which is national advertising. And national advertising shielded the mainstream media because that was where it earned its profits, shielded it from the desires, interests, and concerns of its audience, because its audience was only paying, in the case of print publications, for the paper, for the newsprint, or the mailing bills. Everything inside, every person, every hire, every editor, everybody else was being paid for by the advertising revenue. The advertising revenue is gone. That's one of the reasons that all these magazines have died. All of these places are shells of their former selves. Time magazine can sell for $12 to a guy in Iowa when it had 4 million subscribers 40 years ago. All of that is the case, and they are following the model of the subscription-based world, which is what your customers are paying full freight for what you get. But that is a much more tenuous audience because your democracy dies in darkness subscriber to the Washington Post, and Jeff Bezos is like, I am not going to sacrifice my space business to this paper that I lose $100 million a year on. I'm not endorsing Kamala Harris. And 250,000 people canceled their subscriptions. So that model becomes even less viable than it was before. So we do
Well,
have these
here's
two.
where it'll be interesting to see if they do something smart that Hollywood has done, right? Which is Hollywood has recently taken a lot of the power out of Hollywood covering media, and stars of shows and famous actors are doing their own podcasts, and singers and performers are doing their own podcasts, and they're guests on each other's podcasts, and they've sort of taken the control of the gossip angle of their world. And and really, so that's going to be interesting to see if the rise of Joe Rogan and the admission that yes, he has an audience that is important enough in an election, and even Elon Musk in his own way, the rise of these people, these are extraordinarily successful alternative media people who are not doing things like sitting in a cabin in the woods with a rifle on their lap, right? Joe Rogan is extraordinarily successful by being almost weirdly normal, like conversational for 3 hours and stuff like. It's going to be interesting to see if they take the cue from that, Rogan and others, and say, are we going to be bypassed by this, or can we, sort of co-opt the desire for this type of media?
You make it interesting, going in a slightly different direction. So I was thinking as you were talking, yeah, that's fine. But Joe Rogan has made his gigantic fortune because he sold himself to a larger corporation. He sold his program to Spotify, and he is, under contract to Spotify. So he is now a cog in a larger machine. But there was a very important moment in the journey of this new media culture, which is that Spotify came under enormous assault when it bought the Joe Rogan show. And there was an advertiser boycott organized, and there were op-eds, and there was everything. And there was a
There were
moment.
musicians who pulled their Neil Young
Right.
pulling his music off of Spotify.
Exactly. And there was a moment of decision for whoever it is that runs Spotify to say, oh my God, I'm scared. Like, I don't know what this is going to mean. I made a mistake. I better pull back and do what Jeffrey Goldberg did and fire Kevin Williamson before he starts here. But, Spotify was a company, that had a subscription model and was looking for people to pay it money for. And Jeffrey Goldberg is a slavey of Mrs. Jobs who pays his salary. And so he was just looking to lick the underside of her shoe, and did so by firing Kevin. And the head of Spotify looked at the order of battle in the United States and said, I'm sticking with the Joe Rogan audience, and I'm not listening to Heather Cox Richardson and whoever else is organizing, and Neil Young, who is 211 years old and hasn't had a functioning brain cell since 1977. I'm not listening to them. I'm going, this guy has 20 million, he's 200 million downloads a month. That's where my future is. That moment could have gone another way in theory, and still could go another way. Who knows? Pressure can be pressure. But if I were the Trump people, I would, and he was trying to do this with Truth Social, which he now, of course, no longer needs because his biggest supporter owns the company that he was created, Truth Social, to fight against. I'd follow Joe Rogan. I'd start doing podcasts out of the White House. I'd start doing, fireside chats that were on Twitter and on.
You should still go to Rogan. Don't make Rogan.
I'm not saying he shouldn't go to Rogan. I'm saying that the evolution here is why not cut out the middleman and do direct marketing yourself? You sold Trump stakes, sell the Trump presidency. What's the medium? This is your new medium, the podcast medium, the video podcast, the YouTube program. That's your medium. You're the most famous person in the world. You love to talk. Now, if I was communications people, I might be terrified. If I were Zelensky, I might be, who knows what he could say that could move markets and change the world dynamic. But hey, somebody said to Roosevelt, there's this medium, radio. It's like taking over everything. You can go right to the people without any filter, talk to them. They can hear your voice. No one ever knew what a president sounded like before.
He should have Vance do it for him, because there's the vice president's job. There's nothing to do. Like, he should create, and Vance is very good at it. And then
they can both have shows.
He can just say, he can deny, he can say, oh, that's just JD going off on the president.
When I was a kid, there was an impressionist. You can actually go on YouTube and listen to this. David Fry, who was the great Nixon impressionist, name spelled Frye. And he recorded a comedy album that I listened to so much that I literally wore the grooves out. It was called Radio Free Nixon. And the idea was Nixon is complaining that the media are unfair to him. And Pat says to him, why don't we have a radio station? The Johnsons, meaning Lyndon Johnson, owned a television station. We could have a radio station. And Nixon's like, a radio station. Then good. And then the album is a day in the programming of the Richard Nixon radio station. And it is one of the great comedy albums ever recorded. As I say, go listen to it on YouTube. This is my commentary recommends for the day. Go listen to Radio Free Nixon by David Fry, and you will get a sense in a weird way of what the Trump White House could do with the knowledge that has gleaned literally over the last year about how effective this direct marketing messaging is, and not through the vehicle of the White House press corps, and not through the briefing in the White House press room, although maybe the antagonism is a good foil and dynamic for him and for whoever his press secretary would be, who should be Scott Jennings, by the way. That's my second commentary recommends. Trump should make Scott Jennings his press secretary. Anyway, nonetheless, I think there's something there. I'm not in the habit of giving Trump communications advice or information, and this is not my field. But, why the hell not? Is what I have to say. Okay, gone too long again. We're going to try to stick to an hour. We're going to try to stick to an hour from here on in. But, I'm getting older, and like Trump, I'm going to start talking about Bryson DeChambeau and catching the gantry on the It's keep going on for too long. We'll be back tomorrow. For Abe, Seth, Matt, and Christine, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.